Luna, thank you very much for being here. How are
Nice
you?
to meet you, JV. I'm good. I'm excited. How is everyone doing? It's been like a full day of panels, super interesting. How many here are gamers? Like, oh yeah, raise your hand. Gotcha. Okay, good. My people.
So you've been called the first so many times in your career, maybe the first female game developer in the Philippines, the co-creator of the first Filipino PC game. So what does it feel like being a pioneer, and is there like a sort of pressure, and does it start feeling like a superpower?
Ooh, that's tough. Yeah, so just for context, after college, I joined a company, my first job. They were making the first Filipino game, but I didn't really know what that was. It was a job, right? And you just want to do well in your job. But we were making a game called Anito, Defend the Land Enraged. And we didn't really know also that it would be historically significant. Again, we were just trying to, trying to release it. We built our own engine. We learned everything on the job. It was like, this was in 2002. Was anyone not born yet in 2002? Oh, my back. Oh, okay. Yeah, so back then, yeah, we had to do everything ourselves. So we were all firsts, right? It just so happened that I was the only female on the team, and so that's what made me the first female game developer. And I didn't really understand what that meant until much later. Like, you know, the game industry was very, very male-dominated before, much more than it is now. And it didn't really occur to me what the significance of being first was until someone had pointed it out. I also want to shout out to Gabby, YGG founder, who was on that same team of Anito Defend a Land Enraged with me. So he and I have been here since the beginning of the Philippine gaming industry. He's also a first, basically.
So yeah, you gave us a brief rundown on what Anito is. So could you also go into the unique storytelling that you guys crafted into this seminal project?
Sure. Because I asked a few of you and some of you weren't born yet, has anyone actually heard of Anito, Defend the Land and Rage? Oh no, it's one person, thank you. It's totally okay, before your time. This was also before like YouTube and all of that. Like the game, we packed it in physical boxes that we had to drive to Data Blitz. Like it came on CD-ROMs with keys, like it was before your time. So narratively, and I know that you're a narrative gamer, right? So I think this is super interesting. So I was hired as a head story writer, and my job was to write the story of one of the playable characters. So bear with me for a second. So basically, Anito is kind of like Diablo, the old Diablo, right? So 2D sprites on a 3D world, isometric view for the gamers. They're like, yes, I understand what you're saying. But it was set in like a Filipino fantasy world. So it had Filipino names. They would use Tagalog sometimes, Filipino weapons, mythology. I wrote the character of Maya, and there was another playable character, Aguila, and they were brother and sister. And if you played the game, you choose. Like at the start of a game now, you're like, choose your character, whatever, right? But we were super ambitious, so what we did was, if you chose Aguila, he had a completely different story, started in a completely different place in this RPG that we made, and then if you chose Maya, then she started somewhere else. And so we basically made 2 games in one, which was kind of crazy. And so it was very, very story-driven. There was combat, there was puzzles, there was magic, you have all of this. But really, what we did was, how do you create a story about the Philippines in the 16th century? How do you tell the story of like the tribal peoples fighting against colonizers who were coming into the islands and trying to restore this magical land that was getting hurt by all the war that was happening, ravaging the lands, but make it in such a way that if we publish this globally, which was our dream, that people who didn't know about the Philippine history would still enjoy it and understand it. Because obviously, if you're Filipino, you're like, I know exactly what they're talking about, right? I know exactly what this period was in Philippine history, when the colonizers came, etc. But we didn't say it was in the Philippines. We made up a whole fantasy world about it. So I'm super proud of the story that we had written, because if you're not Filipino, And we were super popular in like Russia, like random countries. But like, if you're not Filipino, you can enjoy this fantasy world for what it was. But if you were Filipino, you're like, I know exactly what that is. And so that was kind of our goal with the narrative of it.
So I'm curious, could you still get a copy of Anito on platforms like Steam or any other online?
I think it's in abandonware. It is truly abandoned. But actually, like even the executable file doesn't work anymore. But like somebody had figured out how to make it run because this was old, y'all. This was like 2003, right? However, there is a guy who actually played the whole Anito and recorded this playthrough on YouTube. So that's interesting. You can actually watch the whole game being played by this guy, Neil Corre. So that's an option. But yeah, you can't really buy it anymore.
Are you like expecting a remaster anytime soon?
I don't think so. Gabby's laughing. So the company that made Anito is called Anino Entertainment. They have been rebranded as Anino Games, and they are still around. But the original team, we are all in our separate companies and countries. So unless somebody found a team that would want to remaster it, I'm not sure. I will like to say that De La Salle University is trying to develop a Filipino computer game engine, and they are calling it Project Anito. And they're doing that in homage to the first Filipino game.
So what is it like? Maybe is it difficult to try to convince even the global or even the local audience that a Filipino deity could be as compelling as maybe a Marvel superhero without the budget, of course?
Yeah, so back then, again, this was pre-YouTube. The internet existed, we're not that old, but like it wasn't, like pop culture wasn't like it was now. So in order for you to know what the latest game was, you had to buy like gaming magazines that were physical to kind of find out what it was. So Anito was a very indie game, right? So in the Philippines, we had a lot of press. We were on the covers of magazines because they're like, this is the first Filipino game. We had a big launch party. So it was a big deal here. Internationally, you know, like people didn't even know that the Philippines made games. And why would they? Nobody had made games before this point. But what happened was we got nominated in the Independent Games Festival. If you're familiar, the IGF, it's kind of like the Oscars of indie gaming. And that takes place in San Francisco at the Game Developers Conference. And we won in innovation in audio. So someone from our team actually flew to San Francisco, went on stage and said, this is a Filipino game. And the reason that we won innovation in audio is because we used Filipino instruments. Like, it was like Filipino tribal music as the soundtrack. And they'd never heard this before. So they were like, that's so cool. And we won Best in Audio. And that's what made Anito something. Like, that really put not just the game on the map, but the country on the map. Because now people are like, the Philippines, like, where's that? What do you mean? Like, you make games? And because of the attention that award got, you know, we started traveling, going to international conferences, and then other studios started popping up here as well because they read it in the, you know, magazines and the newspapers that, oh, you're making games in the Philippines, you can do that? Okay. And so I think more than any success the game itself had, and it didn't have a lot of financial success, it really jump-started the Philippine gaming industry as we know now.
So you talked about that milestone in the IGF Awards in 2004. So 2 decades later, would you say that the industry has moved past non-Western culture, music, as innovative rather than just being a valid musical style?
Yeah, definitely, because the access that we have now to the world is insane, right? Like, think of before Spotify, before streaming, how would you ever hear the music of another country unless it was on the radio, unless it was on MTV, and that already assumes some kind of success, right, in order to get onto those platforms. But now you can stream music from anywhere, and you can publish your own music easily. And so now when you play a game, like I'm sure some of you, do you have Steam debt like I do? Like when there's a Steam sale, you buy like 20 things. But like, it almost doesn't matter where the game comes from, because like you look at the game and you're like, this is super interesting. And then you find out later, oh, this is cool, like it was made in this country, oh, it's made by this solo dev in this place. And so like we have such a global access to entertainment now. And so I feel like there's less barriers, but there's also more noise. So for example, a lot of Filipino games have come out since us. Again, like you said, it's been 20 years, but like if I ask the audience right now, I don't know how many you could name, because it's hard to cut through the noise. Like just being a Filipino-made game doesn't necessarily make you special if there are so many of you, right? So that's really the challenge, is how can you make a game that is super interesting, almost regardless if it's Filipino-themed or not. But if it's Filipino-themed, then you add the layer of representation. Like that's super cool. I'm seeing myself in this fictional world.
So building on that topic of representation and being a Filipino game developer, there's always this maybe a tightrope walk of being authentic to a source material, but also with a quest to make it accessible to a global audience. So a lot of people might not know, if they're not Filipino, they might not know what a tikbalang is from a capre. So how do you keep turning cultural and world-building source material into a Wikipedia entry without maybe combat mechanics?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. If you think about the role-playing games that we love, right? So like, think about like Fallout, Borderlands, random. These are just things I've played in the past 5 years. When you see a monster in the wasteland, and you've never seen anything like it before, you don't necessarily think, is that real? Did they base it on a historical thing? Is that physically, scientifically accurate? Like, we really suspend our disbelief when we're playing a game, right? We just take for granted, yep, that's the creature in the wasteland. And in Anito, it was the same. So we did have a tikbalang, but we had like lesser known mythological creatures. But they are interesting creatures that fit the world, rather than, let me tell you about the history of the tikbalang. Like, because nobody wants to be like, talked down to when you're playing a game. You just want to enjoy. And so if you come up with a creature that is fitting for the world, that has great combat, that's maybe terrifying or huge, like our tikbalang was huge, it was twice the size of a man, and it made these terrible horse sounds that was actually our engineer snoring. We had recorded him and we used that as the tikbalang sounds, and it was super crazy. But like, you don't necessarily have to think, I wonder where this is from. But then if you read the entries, because every single creature had an entry, you're like, oh, this is called the tikbalang. Oh, I see. Oh, this is actually a historical, like mythological creature from the Philippines. Okay, that's cool. So that was my goal also as the writer for this, is we're not gonna put representation for representation's sake. You want to make it still serve the gameplay, like serve the world, make sure the game is fun. And that's a bonus, is that the things that we put there are very, very Filipino.
And just a bit of background for the audience, like you're also an educator, right? So your students may not have grown up with titles like Anito, but more so titles like Genshin Impact, Valorant, Mobile Legends. And a lot of these games actually, highlight Asian culture or were made by Asian studios for global markets. So how do you teach your students that there's maybe an option to make something locally rooted that is unapologetic for it?
So right now, just for context, I exited my company, Altitude Games, about 6 months ago, and so I'm teaching game design now. So for game design, when they pitch their game, I don't limit the topics that they need to pitch about. There are competitions where, for example, the Cultural Center of the Philippines had the first grant, like government-funded grant for games that were made about Philippine culture. So they did this a couple of years ago. And so for the games like that, you had to use like the CCP encyclopedia and use like Philippine culture as your topic. In my classes, I don't do that because I'm not here to gatekeep their ideas. I'm trying to teach them how to think about games, but the content is from them. However, next term I'm teaching game writing. And for me, game writing narrative is different because I believe that the best narratives come from something that is true to you. So like, if it is a story that somehow comes from your life, even if you have to fictionalize it, right? You set it in a sci-fi world or whatever it is. But like when the narrative is true to you, then you recognize that as a reader, or in this case, a player. So maybe next term, I may be more discerning of their content.
So how would you teach your students to, when they craft a game, how do they keep things non-derivative while introducing these Filipino elements, for example?
It's a lot of prototyping. I think it's healthy to look around the market and see what succeeds, but you want to try something new. But I always tell my students, everything is great on paper. Like all designs are equal on paper. It doesn't matter unless you build it. So you have to build it, prototype it, and that's how you come up with new ideas. And it's the same, I would say, for whether it's, again, a Filipino-themed content or not. It's like, you can write anything that you want on paper, but until you put it in a game and play it, you won't know if it fits. I do believe we have to wrap it up, just letting you know about the time.
Okay, just for the last question, does Filipino game development need to be about culture, or can a Filipino game developer make a great sci-fi game, maybe set in space, with this valid representation, and proving that Filipinos can play in any type of sandbox they can choose?
Again, I don't want to gatekeep content, but I think it's more like the best stories or the best experiences come from things that we know. So even if you set it in space, but maybe it's a story about, somebody who's lost a loved one, and maybe that comes from real life. Or, the way that an area in your fantasy world looks like the area that you grow up in, and it just becomes a richer source of material rather than trying to create everything from scratch. And the Philippines, we are so rich in material, y'all. You know this, the people who live here. You look around, you take a photo, you can put that in a game, it's incredible. So yeah, I would encourage, if there are any game devs in the audience, like look around and be open and try to put your experience in the game.
Well, personally, I'm not a game dev, but I'm just someone who loves games as well, and I really appreciate the conversation, from one gamer to another. Thank you very much for your time, Luna.
Thank you, JV. It was great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, JV. Thank you, Luna.